Do you care about climate change? I bet you do, and our future depends on it. In this video, we'll see that people are ready for very ambitious climate action. In the previous video, we've seen that support is stronger for climate policies at the global rather than the national level. Sure, a global climate scheme would be most effective at addressing climate change, but it would mean that high-income countries contribute to the decarbonization effort in low-income countries. Are people in Western countries ready for that kind of solidarity? Let's take a look. Using surveys representative of the population of the US and 4 European countries, Adrien Fabre and his co-authors studied the support of a global climate scheme. Here is how they describe the policy. At the Paris Agreement in 2015, all countries have agreed to contain global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. To limit global warming to this level, there is a maximum amount of greenhouse gases we can emit globally. To meet the climate target, a limited number of permits to emit greenhouse gases can be created globally. Polluting firms would be required to buy permits to cover their emissions. Such a policy would make fossil fuel companies pay for their emissions and progressively raise the price of fossil fuels. Higher prices would encourage people and companies to use less fossil fuels, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In accordance with the principle that each human has an equal right to pollute, the revenues generated by the sale of permits could finance a global basic income. Each adult in the world would receive $30 per month, thereby lifting out of extreme poverty the 700 million people who earn less than $2 a day. The typical American would lose out financially $85 per month, as he or she would face $115 per month in price increases, which is higher than the $30 they would receive. The policy could be put in place as soon as countries totaling more than 60% of global emissions agree on it. Countries that would refuse to take part in the policy could face sanctions, like tariffs, from the rest of the world and would be excluded from the basic income. Though quite detailed, they ensured that respondents understood the description by asking them comprehension questions about the most concerning aspects: who benefits and who loses from such a policy. They then provided the correct answers. In short, respondents were aware that they would lose out from that policy. Support for the global climate scheme was then asked through simple yes/no questions. In Europe, 76% of respondents support the measure. This overwhelming majority is significantly higher than for a similar policy at the national level, even though the majority of Europeans would benefit from the national policy and lose out with the global version. This reveals that Europeans are willing to pay a few dozen euros per month if it contributes credibly to ending global warming and extreme poverty. In the United States, support is in the majority, though less pronounced at 54%. There are 2 reasons for this lower level of support. Firstly, Americans have highly polarized views on the climate issue. 74% of Democrats support the global climate scheme compared to 26% of Republicans. Secondly, Americans stand to lose more with this plan, with the typical American facing a monthly loss of $85 compared to $25 for the typical German as shown in this map. This map illustrates who would receive transfers from the global climate scheme and who would contribute. To be precise, it represents the median net gains per country resulting from a carbon price of $90 per ton of CO2. It is evident that the global climate scheme redistributes resources from countries with carbon footprints per adult higher than the global average, such as the United States, to countries with lower carbon footprints, like Ethiopia. Okay, people say they support the global climate scheme, but do they mean it? The analyses indicate that, yes, the declared support for this measure is indeed sincere. To verify, the researchers used a number of different methods. I'll focus on the most convincing elements, but feel free to read the study to find out about methods I won't be covering, such as the willingness to sign a petition and the knowledge that responses will be forwarded to the head of state, or a list experiment to detect whether people hide their true opinion. The most compelling method shows that campaigning on the global climate scheme would be beneficial for a candidate at an election. This method is inspired by the work of political scientist Farzan Gassim, who showed that German Greens and Social Democrats would gain 12 points in voting intentions if they advocated for global democracy. For this question, the researchers created two credible political programs, one progressive and one conservative, and asked respondents to imagine a scenario where the next election would feature two candidates with these respective programs. For half of the respondents, they included the global climate scheme in the progressive program. The respondents were then asked which candidate would they vote for. This table shows the effect on voting intentions of including the global climate scheme in the progressive candidate's platform. In France, including the global climate scheme in a candidate's program resulted in an 11-point gain for the progressive candidate in the second round of the presidential election. This is a massive impact. Although this result is only for France, in no country did support for the global climate scheme cause progressives to lose votes in a statistically significant manner. In the United States, there was a positive effect of 3 points, which is almost significant. The effect has a p-value of 13%, meaning that there would only be a 13% chance of estimating a positive effect of 3 points or more if the true effect were negative. But that's not all. The researchers asked two more questions in a similar style. The framing of these questions differs between the United States and Europe. In Europe, respondents were asked to imagine that the left or center-left would win the next election and were presented with two possible programs for them to campaign on. In the United States, they presented the programs as those of the two main candidates in the next Democratic primary, and only Democrats, independents, and unaffiliated were surveyed. In both questions, people had to choose between Program A and Program B, with the knowledge that the measures in each program were randomly selected from a pool of left or center-left measures. In the first of these two questions, the global climate scheme was not included in the set of measures that could be chosen, but was added to Program A. The result: in all countries, around 60% of people preferred the program that contained the global climate scheme. Considering that, apart from this measure, the programs were on average the same, this result outlines the electoral potential for parties that endorse it, at least for left or center-left parties. The second question follows a similar approach, but this time the programs were created totally randomly, including the possibility of the global climate scheme appearing in Program A, Program B, both programs, or neither program. In fact, for each policy domain, a measure or no measure was randomly drawn. This graph, which presents the results for the UK, shows the effect of including a measure in a program versus no measure in that domain on the likelihood that this program is preferred. In Germany, France, and the UK, a program was 9 to 13 percentage points more likely to be preferred if it included the global climate scheme. In Spain and the United States, the effect was positive but weaker and not statistically significant. In each country, the most popular measures were those improving public services or increasing the minimum wage, closely followed by global redistribution measures. Conversely, the ban on the sale of new combustion engine cars was one of the least popular measures, and it is set to go into effect in 2035 in the European Union and California. The popularity of global redistribution is confirmed by the support expressed for other policies. For example, 69% of Americans and 84% of Europeans support a global tax on millionaires that would finance infrastructures and public services in low-income countries. The support is almost as high as for a national tax on millionaires that would finance healthcare and education in the country. The researchers also asked what share of a tax on millionaires should be allocated to low-income countries rather than retained in the country to finance improved healthcare and education. On average, respondents answered that 1/3 of the wealth tax revenue should flow to low-income countries, with only 12% preferring that all revenues stay in their own country. The results presented here and in the previous video show that a majority of the population in all countries genuinely supports the global climate scheme and greater international solidarity. However, despite this strong support, No party is currently proposing global redistribution measures, and few individuals are advocating for such measures. Perhaps these ideas simply need more advocacy. With grassroots campaigns, political parties might be convinced to incorporate global redistribution and the global climate scheme into their platforms. Governments could be convinced to support them in international climate negotiations, and who knows, eventually implement them. The nonprofit Global Redistribution Advocates is engaged precisely in this advocacy work. In the next video, I will present in greater detail the proposed Global Climate Plan.